At the Nature Center, we're only closed 2 days a year, Christmas and Thanksgiving days. And so it's a work day anyways. And but I'm really trying to get this presentation over with before Wednesday when I start teaching at TCU. So I didn't want to overload my plate any more than necessary. Thank you all for coming. I hope that everybody's here because they're probably just a little bit interested in alligators in North Texas. And let me see. Oh boy, now we're, of course, on the there we go. Had to get my right clicker working. I've learned long ago that I needed to introduce myself no matter who the group was. And while I know a lot of you, the past couple of years, I have not been quite as involved in Master Naturalists. So there's probably some folks that have no idea who the heck I am. My name is Rob Denkhaus. I'm the manager of the Fort Worth Nature Center. Come to you with a lot of different experiences, which you can read about there. But the key thing is that I've been here a long time. I'm coming up on my 24th anniversary at the Nature Center. And over the years, I've held pretty much every position that you can have at the Nature Center. And if I didn't officially hold the position, I did the job. So that includes all the janitorial things and law enforcement and security stuff and all those kind of things. So that is really kind of the genesis of this presentation, really, is the time that I've been here. Now, I've been here long enough to do this, to have the gratuitous grandchildren photos, because when I give my bio, this has become probably the most important thing to me. I'm the proud grandfather of 2 children, Scout. The young lady there in the middle is 3 years old last month. I missed her birthday because of COVID. And then Sterling, who's 10 months old next month, or 11 months old next month. And I do get to see him a little bit more often just because of different parental attitudes towards COVID. But I do want to show how, okay, I face it, some of y'all I've known you a long time. Did you think that my grandkids could be so doggone cute? So back to the reason we're here. Alligators. Oh my God, there are alligators here. If I had $1 for every time I've heard that, I could retire now. Otherwise, I'm going to continue on for another decade or so. Why is alligator history important to the Nature Center and to all naturalists in North Texas? Because every time that alligators come up in conversation, you get these type of responses. Gators aren't native to this area, or gators are just, the gators we have, they were just old pets. They were released or they escaped. Or Parks and Wildlife, they release gators here. Or my particular favorite is gators are they're so dangerous. I can give you a direct quote from a gentleman that used to live down on Lake Worth, where he told me, mark my words, in 5 years, someone will die because of alligators. That was 10 years ago. And so I think we're doing okay on that. But all of these reasons are given to justify why any alligators that are here should be eradicated. So I took this deep dive into the world of alligator history. And that included sifting through over 20,000 print media references from the Star Telegram, the Dallas Morning News, and newspapers I'd never heard of. I also scoured the local television news archives. I've gone through local and state historical websites. I've gone through the Nature Center's document and photo archives, gone through my personal alligator related files and recollections, including talking to people I know that were there to clarify my memory. I've gone through YouTube archives, which I will say is the greatest rabbit hole ever designed on this planet. And then I've gone through focused Google searches, all in search of anything that references alligators in what I defined as North Texas. Now, just in case you try to do the similar search, here's what you're going to find. You're going to find fashion advice and reviews, because apparently at one time, alligator shoes and boots were huge, as were alligator belts, alligator purses and wallets, alligator luggage. I neglected to list on here whole alligators that you could find posed into weird things, alligators smoking cigarettes and things like that. You could, at one time, you could buy all of this online or online, in the newspaper or in the media. You'll find references to the alligator clutch, which apparently was the preferred wrestling hold of a wrestler that performed frequently in the Metroplex.
Amen.
You can find stories about alligators that are from outside the area, because let's face it, everybody loves alligator stories. You can find stories about alligator gar, alligator snapping turtles, and anything else that has the word alligator in it. You can find sales of and recipes for alligator pears. Now, question. Who knows what an alligator pear is?
You do.
I do now. Apparently, somewhere in the mid-70s, there was a rebranding of the product known as alligator pears.
They used to be called, they're avocados.
Exactly. Who would go to the store in search of alligator pears this day and age? I had to put an alligator pear in my smoothie. No, that doesn't sound good. So they rebranded it into avocados, and all of a sudden they're the world's favorite fruit. But you're going to find a lot of that stuff. Now, in my presentations, I always go into them with objectives. And hopefully I can achieve these objectives this evening, because that tells me whether I did a decent job or not. So I want to share my objectives. And at the end of this, I'm hoping that we can all agree that alligators currently inhabit North Texas waters. I'm also hoping that we can all agree that some of the alligators that have in the area probably came from pets that were released or escaped into the area. And that we can all agree that the authorities, Parks and Wildlife, or in some cases the Nature Center, have released some alligators in the area. And that most importantly, we can all agree that alligators predate European settlement of the area. Because if they do that, then they're native. If you notice, I put on this slide at the bottom there a timeline, and it's a reverse timeline with 2020 at the left going all the way back to 1849. 1850 is the last label, but it goes 1 year past that, because in 1849, Ripley Arnold founded Fort Worth. So if I can go that far back, I feel confident that people can accept that gators are native to this area. Are y'all willing to go on this journey with me? Now, if you look at the range maps that are presented by Parks and Wildlife and other authoritarian products, the map on the left, the black and white one, is a Parks and Wildlife official alligator range map. And I'm hoping y'all can see this as I move my cursor around. You got Dallas here, you know, that little suburb of Fort Worth that's to the east. And so you got Dallas County that it's in, and then you have Tarrant County. And this case, Parks and Wildlife kind of gives part of Tarrant County some gator possibility, but it's in this gray area, which is just saying that that's that area where gators may or may not be. We don't really know, but let's face it, the Nature Center is on the northwest side of Tarrant County and is definitely in the white there. Now this map on the right here is from the book Texas Alligators, a relatively recent book and a quality book, I will say, and well worth purchasing from the TAMU press library. In fact, I bought my copy at a Master Naturalist state meeting a few years back. But, excuse me, if you look in this case, I always have to find that right here where my cursor's pointing is Rockwall County. I always have to look for that tiny little county that stands out. They don't give them any gators. And so that would mean this right here is Dallas County, which would mean Tarrant County, Parker County. None of these areas here have any gator records. And if you read the book and the text that goes along with this particular figure, they went through all of the literature to find any reference and darkened a county that was included. Now, you can see a lot of similarities between these maps, but they're not exactly the same. Parks and Wildlife takes more of a biologist view of kind of rounding out and putting some gray area, if you will, in there because they kind of think they know where gators are, but they're not willing to commit. So one of the goals of my presentation is to commit to putting gators in these counties. In fact, I'll put gators in these counties too, if we wanted to try to do that. But we're going to start at the beginning, which in this case, the beginning is the end. We're going to go with 2020. I don't have any 2021 alligator references to give you at this point in time. What are we, January 18th? Gators are smart. They're laid up for the winter. But in 2020, here at the Nature Center, we had our first alligator nest that we could actually document with photographs. This is on a game camera, and that is an 8-foot female alligator. I'm going to play her again there so you get a chance now that you've seen her move and can focus on her, that you're just seeing the tail end of her, and she's throwing vegetation up onto her nest. That was this past summer, and you can tell that the camera is on an opposite side of the fence from her, and that's because we had to put the fence up on 3 sides of the nest, leaving the 4th side towards the river open, because basically this was immediately adjacent to a frequently used trail. And we closed that trail section down to keep the public out, which was, let's face it, basically successful in the sense that nobody got hurt or anything, but many, many people walked past our trail closed signs and probably unbeknownst to them, walked within a few feet of an active alligator nest. The female tended to lay in the water just offshore watching. And if somebody had actually tried to do anything aggressive towards the nest, I'm sure she would have responded. So can we agree that we currently have alligators in North Texas?
Yes.
2019, just go back a year, we'll start slow here. There was a gator poached in the upper reaches of Lake Worth, which was actually on Nature Center waters, where they had caught a gator and lopped its tail off because they were obviously looking for a meal or two off of gator tail, but they left the rest of it, leaving actually some good quality meat, but leaving just the public relations dilemma of the remaining carcass floating in the water on the Nature Center. And that was in the news, and some of you may have seen it. Also, shortly thereafter, there was a 4-foot gator that's literally stopped traffic on Wells Burnett Road, which crosses the Eagle Mountain Dam between the Eagle Mountain and the Nature Center, and actually stopped a school bus. It was late in the afternoon.
Or sheet line. But yeah, we just stayed connected. She lost my number for a second.
Caused quite a stir there. Now, it's really interesting because if you look into all the published things, everybody that is associated with Eagle Mountain will tell you, we don't have gators up there. But until you talk to the people that live on Eagle Mountain, and they'll go, oh yeah, we have gators. So the authorities at Eagle Mountain aren't admitting it, but the residents certainly are. The authorities do admit that there's gators on the downstream side of the dam, but oh no, they can't cross that. I think this proves that different. Now we'll go into the what I call the sad saga of Rooster. Rooster was an alligator that in 2010 and 2011, we at the Nature Center here had a research project going on in cooperation with Texas A&M Commerce, a student by the name of Joe Lewis, who naturally acquired the nickname of Gator Joe. His very first capture in May of 2010 was the gator that became known as Rooster. Rooster was blind, hence his name Rooster, which is after the John Wayne character Rooster Cogburn. But we caught Rooster in Lake Worth, just off of Casino Beach, right before the Memorial Day holiday, which gave it a real Jaws, original Jaws vibe, because we had a big holiday weekend coming up and everybody was wanting to go swimming in the lake there, and we had a big gator swimming around. So we did manage to go in and catch him. We caught him with using a catch pole, which is what basically dog catchers use, although ours had to be made of stainless steel to deal with a big gator. Rooster and was originally 9'3" in 2010. And when you slip that noose over their head out in open water, they proceed to go into the famed death roll move, twisting their body over and over and over again, and try to go underneath the boat, which even a stainless steel pole will get bent into a pretzel in that action. But we managed to catch him and pull him to shore so that we could start the processing, which is measuring and weighing and attaching a radio transmitter, which you can see in the picture there is on Rooster's neck. And by the time we got him to shore, we had a crowd of about 40 people there to watch us, which allowed us, or caused us to call in the Lake Worth Marshals for crowd control. And we were unsuccessful in controlling the crowd to the point that we loaded Rooster up into the back of the Marshals pickup and took off down the road to get behind a locked gate so we could finish our processing of him before we brought him back to the Nature Center for release, because we knew this gator. He was blind. We knew him. We could identify him at sight. So we released him back onto the Nature Center, where he proceeded to go back into his normal routine. And if you know the Nature Center, he used to like hang out in Big Hole up there at the top end of the channelized stretching of the river. He was caught again the next year in 2010. Because he was blind, he took advantage of easy food sources, and a whole frozen chicken hanging in a trap was pretty attractive to him. So he was very easy to catch. And after that, we just kind of tried to stay away from him since we had a radio on him. We didn't try to trap in his area because we would just catch him again. He was quiet, but very observable for the next 5 years until July of 2015, where He was renamed Hollywood by the TV stations and the nuisance alligator control operator out of Houston that the city brought in to capture him because he had ventured not just into Lake Worth, but over the dam and down the river all the way to Panther Island area where he was caught. And they relocated him to an undisclosed property that belonged to Tarrant Regional Water District. I believe it was probably just north of the Nature Center, and released him there, hoping he would stay put. But he's a gator, so he went where gators want to go. And so he came back to the Nature Center, and by July of 2016, he was back down below the Lake Worth Dam and ended up being shot by game wardens. So it's a much, much longer, much more detailed story, but his life that I personally can document lasted from 2010 to 2016. So he is added to our timeline below. Now this overlaps Rooster, but he's a tale that needs to be told. The equally sad tale of Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam was our biggest gator during that study. He was 11 foot 3 inches, and he was originally caught in 2011, but we first were introduced to him in 2010. Our first introduction was trying to catch him with the catch pole, the same way we had caught a rooster. And we had gone after Sam a number of times. And basically you go at night with a spotlight and you see the eye shine and you motor up to him and you kill the motor and let your momentum take you up and try to place the boat just along the left side of the gator. So the gator is just off the right side of the boat, because Gator Joe, our researcher, was hanging out of the bow of the boat, and he's right-handed. So you worked off the right-hand side. And he would try to slip the noose, the snare over the gator's head. And Sam, like all gators that we had experienced so far, their go-to move as the noose goes over their head is to dive and go to the left. In this case, the first time that we really encountered Sam and got a full noose on him, he was in less than 18 inches of water, so he couldn't dive. So he threw a monkey wrench in our plans by, instead of going down and to the left, he went up and to the left. And of course, up means up and over the boat, where this 11-foot gator, who we know weighed well over 400 pounds, his head slung to the left and over top of the boat, sending Gator Joe into a matrix-like limbo backflip move in a 14-foot John boat, causing Joe to end up flat on his back in the bottom of the boat. I was in the second seat, leaned away because it wasn't directly over me, but I was soaked by the splash of a 11-foot gator hitting the water roughly a foot away from the boat, while Rick, our third guy that was our assistant working the motor, he just sat in the back there and gave a very, very nervous laugh. It was probably the most threatening thing I've ever experienced with wildlife. Not that Sam was trying to do anything to us, but if he had hit any of us, it was not going to be a good scene. And I've never seen a wild gator that close, flipping past my head. We ended up catching him in a cage trap after he had busted out of quite a few traps over the course of a year's time. And we finally got him and had to go in and deal with him in knee-deep water. But then when you add the foot of muck that you stand in while you're dealing with them, you're thigh deep and pretty much unmovable when you're dealing with an 11-foot gator. top picture there shows him in the trap. Each of those squares is 4x4, and he's a little bit back. His head was well over 24 inches long. He was caught in a 7-foot trap, and he was 11 foot 3 inches, and he could spin in that trap. It was quite impressive. The bottom picture shows you with him when we were finished with him and able to get the radio on his neck there before he went back in the water. And then finally on the far right, you see his fate, where he was illegally killed. He was poached on the Nature Center in May of 2012 by a couple of guys who were fishing, yet happened to have AR-15s with them, and claimed that he attacked them and shot him. They later ended up paying fines to Parks and Wildlife to the tune of at least $6,300, $5,300 of which was in restitution for killing an 11-foot alligator. The other 1,000 was miscellaneous fines for not having life jackets, not having their boat registered in Lake Worth, and all those kind of things. But it was a very sad story that is probably all too common. When you talk about gators in the Metroplex area, people talk about White Rock Lake a lot. And I've got 5 references to gators on White Rock. 1991, one was caught on a fishing lure. 1950, that size wasn't given. 1951, an 8-foot gator was shot. 46, a 4-foot gator caught while fishing. 1940, an article just said several had been landed at White Rock Lake. And in 1932, there were 4 separate articles that detailed gators caught ranging from 14 inches to 42 inches. So gators have been on White Rock for a long time, and apparently fishing for them is about as good a way to get them as anything. As I went through all this, and I have over 200 references, I could have done a pure chronological thing, but we'd be here till midnight. And so I did these kind of artificial groupings to lay them out. So this is the grouping of country club and pool alligators. We've got what, 3, 6, 7 of them that were associated with country clubs or pools. The McKinney Country Club is pretty explainable because it's adjacent to the Herd Museum with a bunch of natural habitat. Ridgely and Colonial Country Clubs are close enough to the Trinity, and really the pools are all close enough to the Trinity or to another body of water that could justify explaining them by being natural gators that just managed to make it there. However, all of the articles talk about pranksters throwing gators in. Now, some of these gators were of some size. And so where did these gators come from is always going to be a question. And given the proximity of what I propose to be native alligator habitat, I say they all could be native alligators. Now, they could also be pets, especially those early ones, but because they tend to be smaller. But I think the possibility of them being native in terms of their origin is still there. Another artificial category I created of trophy gators, and this is not all of them because there's plenty of large gators that I'm trying to represent years here. So trying to get unrepresented years, you have 2005, an 8-foot alligator in Lake Ray Hubbard. 1987, you got a 9-foot 3-inch gator in an Alito pond, a stock pond, which a story that goes with that is that gator was well known in the area, had been around for at least 12 years in various ponds, moving around Lido area. 8-foot alligator in 1983. And every time I look at that, it makes me laugh because of all the people that I've talk to that say, I've lived on Lake Worth all my life and I've never heard about an alligator. And most of these people are well older than somebody born in 1983. And that was pretty big news at the time, seeing an 8-foot gator in Lake Worth. 1981, you had an 11-foot 9-inch alligator taken out of the Trinity River near Hutchins. Now, this is the first reference I'll give to the Palmetto Slough Alligator Refuge, but Hutchins would be right in that general area. And I put an asterisk by that one because, number one, that's the black and white newspaper photo there above, that the carcass was taxidermied and is still at the Dallas Museum of Natural History. But it also was investigated by law enforcement because that was an illegal alligator take in 1981. Lemon Lake is also down in that area in 1965, a 9-foot alligator there. And then going way back, 1907, 8-foot 6-inch alligator taken at a Dallas Hunting and Fishing Club, which also translates to the vicinity of the current Palmetto Slough Alligator Refuge. Oh, and by the way, the color picture there is a Nature Center alligator from our study. That was one we named Huck. That Huck was 9 foot 6 inches. He's actually lashed down to a 10-foot stretch of extension ladder, aluminum extension ladder, which we found was the easiest way to transport them from place to place, keeping them from thrashing about and such. So we had at least 4 gators that were over 9 feet at the Nature Center alone in 2010 and 11. Another phenomenon we saw in the references is what I refer to as the trusted expert occurrences. All of these folks were given authority that their word was given authority when they were quoted in the media. That the aquarium and zoo folks, okay, I understand that. They have animal backgrounds. And to this day, we still rely on folks from the zoo and from the Nature Center as knowing what they're talking about when it comes to animal related issues. The 1944 Dallas police officers, I'm not so sure they were alligator experts, but I'm going to credit the whole released pet idea to Mr. Bill Wright, who was an employee of the Dallas Aquarium in 1941, who in the public eye was the first to introduce the idea that the alligators they were seeing were the escaped pets brought from Florida and Louisiana and released in waters local waters after they were, had grown too big for comfort for the people that had brought them here. I also want to point out Mr. Lawrence Curtis, who started at the Dallas Aquarium and moved to the Fort Worth Zoo and moved up to being director of the Fort Worth Zoo. And he's actually the gentleman standing behind the elephant in the picture. It would appear from my investigations that Mr. Curtis was kind of the Jack Hanna of the day, at least locally, and all animal questions were taken to him. And much like Jack Hanna tends to do today, he provides responses that are designed to keep people interested in animals, even if they may not be 100% correct. And so these folks that are listed here really kept the idea alive, and that all of our gators came from escaped or released pets. And you notice our timeline starting to begin to look like a barcode kind of as we pop all these lines up. Especially when we add in the category that I call the tiny gators, those that are less than 2 feet long. during the 40s and 50s, this really was a lot of gators. A lot of years had multiple small gator reports. And I think the media, the newspapers in particular, love to stick these type pictures on in the paper here of kids holding up these little gators. One of the more interesting stories I found was in the Highland Park area of Dallas, that these kids had found a gator, and they actually had a police officer come help them catch it. And the police officer left the scene after he had tied the gator to a post in one of the boys' front yards with the promise that the boy would call the zoo and have the zoo come pick it up. I don't think today our law enforcement's going to leave an alligator in the possession of anybody that isn't capable or qualified to keep it. So I just found that a little bit interesting. The story or picture on the right there is a small gator that wandered into Alfred's Refrigerated Warehouse on Cadiz Street in Dallas, which is, I looked it up, it's right there by the Trinity River. So it's feasible that a small gator could have wandered in there, and they kept it, and we're going to try to pawn it off on one of the zoos. This is actually my favorite category simply because of this story. There were a number of stories that just referred to gators wandering down the street getting picked up. Gators of varying sizes. Now this particular one, or wandering down or found dead, I should say. This particular story I want to relate with this category is the gentleman on the left here is named Marvin Hill. Marvin lived in South Dallas, and he took a fishing trip, went to Arkansas, where a friend of his had a private lake. And the friend that owned the lake, he had realized he had a turtle problem on the lake. So he had gotten himself an alligator and released it there to control the turtles. Now, apparently the gator did a good job, or the friend decided that it wasn't working or something, because Marvin here, he had, while fishing, hooked the alligator and brought it in, and the owner of the pond or lake said that, hey, why don't you just take that home with you? So Marvin, thinking, what a great thing to show my wife, took it home.
She was thrilled.
He threw it in the back seat of his car and drove it from Arkansas back to South Dallas and put it in his garage. And I guess he showed his wife and neighbors and other friends and such, and then realized he really needed something to do with it. So he was trying to find somebody that would take it. And the first article on this gator was actually an article in search of somebody to take the gator off of Marvin's hands. And to show how different times were back in the 50s, if you were interested in acquiring Marvin's gator, the Dallas Morning News was so kind as to provide you not just with his address, but with his phone number as well. So you could just show up and say, Marvin, I'd like to have your gator. And apparently he would have been willing to give it to you. But he had contacted the zoos, and the Dallas Zoo and the Dallas Aquarium weren't interested. The Fort Worth Zoo was interested, but they didn't have a truck that could go all the way over to South Dallas and pick that up. Nor did Marvin have the time, he said, to drive all the way to Fort Worth to deliver it. Well, it seems that the Dallas Veterans for Foreign Wars, Dallas VFW, was getting ready to host a national convention. And so I'm going to pull up a video here that was on WBAP back then. Let me check the date here. Boy, where is that? Date's on here. I'm thinking it's 1957. But the commander of the Dallas VFW said he would haul it over to Fort Worth for him. And it was a big news story at the time. There's no audio to this video, but that's the commander of Dallas VFW. And there goes Mr. Hill into his garage, and there's the alligator. Now, the key thing to getting the alligator is that they wrapped in a blanket to catch it. And then they have to obviously control the jaws. And so the commander of the VFW uses his best Boy Scout knot tying skills to truss the jaws up. And then they put it back on the blanket, and then they roll it up for transport. And then they also, great camera shot, and then they add a little extra rope trusses there.
Rob.
Gator totally under control.
Rob, we're not seeing the video.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh.
Although your description, I can see it in my head.
Well, I didn't even think about that it wouldn't show that part because it wasn't playing inside here. I'm sorry. Let me back up. I got to do a new share.
I thought you were giving us a preview of what we were going to see.
Oh, let's see. Do you see that? Can you see a car? Black and white video?
Yes, perfect. Yes.
Okay, I got to back up because this is great stuff. Okay, here's the commander and Mr. Hill going in the garage. I guess these are the neighbor kids. You got to wrap the gator in a blanket to get control of it. It's about 5 feet long. Kids are thrilled. Here's the Boy Scout skills. Got to wrap it in the blanket. You remember, Marvin there just threw this in the back seat of the car to bring it from Arkansas. Got it all trussed up. Gator looks happy. And then they carry it over and they put it in the trunk of the commander's car. Gently place it. Notice that block that the commander put in there so that it'd have ventilation for the gator on the trip. Now, the articles tell you that he left Marvin's place at 11 a.m., drove to Fort Worth, got there at 1:20, only made 2 stops at filling stations. Lo and behold, there's no gator in the trunk when he gets to the zoo. Dallas VFW commander was trying to do a great PR campaign promoting the upcoming convention and lost the alligator. That is a look of dejection. So, let me go back to sharing the other. You should see the original screen.
Yes.
Okay. So
what happened to the alligator?
Well, if you see the headline in the on the right there, that was the final story on this matter. The alligator slipped its binds, slipped out of the blanket. All that was still in the trunk, managed to apparently slide out through that opening that the commander had so nicely left for ventilation purposes, landed on Highway 80 and was run over by cars.
Oh.
So the headline was, alligator won't be seen later.
Oh.
But do we call him Houdini?
Exactly. Sad story. But you can't imagine all the weird stories that I read going through all this stuff. Speaking of weird stories, 1957, we had the sewer gator. Now, we had a few gators related to sewers, or at least referenced sewers throughout the history here. But this one here which the color picture is just for effect, fill a blank spot on the screen actually, was just a 4.5 foot gator that in the summer, actually in July of 1957, early of the morning, a bunch of kids went to their playground, which was apparently in the sewer system of Dallas. And the year prior, the water department had gone in and sealed up most of the entrances to keep kids out. But there was one entrance left as an access point for maintenance. And it was described as a pillbox, which if anybody that has ever watched an old World War II movie knows what that means, of a concrete barrier with a kind of a manhole cover on top, which could allow access to the tunnels below. And the water department had neglected to put in any kind of ladder because their maintenance guys would have a ladder with them to be able to access down into the tunnels. But the local kids had fashioned their own ladder using a tree branch that was 8 foot long, and so that they could crawl down into the tunnel system and use it as their own play area. And early of a July morning, a couple of kids had gone down in there and come flying back out saying they had seen an alligator. And being typical young boys, they did not tell any authorities. They did not tell any adults. They told all the other kids. So apparently throughout that day, kids were sticking their heads down every access point they could to look down in the sewer system of that neighborhood to see if they could see the gator. And they finally got it to the point that the gator was at the access point, but that the kids couldn't go down there anymore because the gator was basically standing guard at the foot of their branch they had put down in there that allowed them to climb in. So remember, this started early of the morning, and the way the description goes in the article, at dusk, so in July, that's going to be late in the day, one of the kids' mom called the police to say there's a 7 foot alligator in the sewers, which obviously created a stir. And the police informed the water department. So both departments responded and later called in a dog catcher. And the dog catcher, probably as low man on the totem pole, but probably justified on the spot as the guy with the most animal experience, he was sent down the hole into the sewer system to find the gator. He did find it, but he found it about 1.5 blocks away, where he caught it with his catch pole and then had to drag a fighting 4.5 foot long alligator back to the access port. But apparently the kids were back to lining the streets, sticking their heads in, looking at all the grate covers to watch the progress of the gentleman dragging the gator down through the sewer system before he could finally pull it out. The gator was taken to the pound basically at that time, where the next day it was found out that it was actually somebody's pet. And it was found out because the gentleman that owned it was concerned because he had lost that gator, but also another 2 foot gator was found a couple blocks away on the surface. And apparently this gentleman by the name of Richard Laro, whose picture is that smaller black and white photo there as a kid, was an animal lover and a Navy veteran and everything. And his family enjoyed keeping pet alligators and had actually developed a pit type enclosure in their backyard for them. But 2 of their 3 gators had escaped that day or that night. And I found, and these are the rabbit holes you end up going down trying to find more information. In researching Richard Laro, I found his obituary in 2013. He passed away in Lubbock. But his obituary actually referenced him losing his alligators, which were confiscated by the city, and led to the development of Dallas's exotic pet ordinance. But here's the weird part, and how you can go down rabbit holes you never saw coming, that in his obituary, it said that Richard and his wife Myrtle were interviewed by the FBI in 1963 because of their close association with Jack Ruby, who had killed Lee Harvey Oswald. And so our North Texas alligators have a tenuous connection to JFK in a very weird and convoluted pattern. Our next category is what I've termed zoo and carnival gators, and there's actually many more than this that had zoo connections in one way or other, many of them through Lawrence Curtis, who provided trusted expert commentary on them. But it starts with 1909, where Forest Park Zoo, which later became the Fort Worth Zoo, a gator which they said was sick and in need of veterinary care because it had been being fed sticks, cans, and rocks by the visitors. The park board ordered it to be released into the Trinity so that they didn't have to deal with the veterinary bills. And they thought that the gator would just stay close to the zoo there in the river. But as soon as it was released, it started hightailing its way downstream. Now, this would be okay, I guess, except that a follow-up article claimed that a neighborhood downstream was so concerned about it that they'd posted a keen watch out for the gator to get into their stretch of the river, because the people, the residents, were lining the banks. And it says, if the alligator should approach the banks, he will be met with a fusillade of shots, rocks, bricks, and razors. Now, I don't know, maybe it's just a sign of the times, but about the last weapon I would try to tackle a gator with would be a razor. Even using an old school straight razor, that's really too close for comfort there. But apparently that's what the residents of that neighborhood chose to stand guard with. The gator on it, in its sense, was never seen again. And a later article said that it was probably well on its way downstream to the Gulf. But a week later, a follow-up article, the park board changed their story from getting rid of it because it was sick to saying that they threw it in the river because the gator had become unmanageable and incorrigible. Never a good excuse for getting rid of an animal. But at the same time, that same article was saying the park board was trying to sell off a bunch of their goats because they smelled so bad that the neighbors were complaining. So a different time and different complaints in that world. In 1914, Joe, a 6-foot alligator, escaped from a carnival on the north side of Fort Worth. This was a migrant carnival that moved around all the time, and they believed he had escaped into the sewer system of Fort Worth. Next category is what I'm referring to as outlying area gators, because we've shown that Dallas and Fort Worth have a bunch of gators, but the very first 20th century gator report I found was in Cleburne, 1901, where a couple of young men were gathering hay that had been cut and found a 4-foot gator underneath a pile of hay out in the field. And in 2014, a large gator was found in Lake Cleburne. 1908 in Weatherford, in what was called at the time Town Creek, but I believe from its description would be known as Black Warrior Creek now in Weatherford, which feeds Holland Lake. A 3-foot gator was found there. It was hauled into town and exhibited downtown in a large water trough, which it escaped from, never to be seen again. But the thoughts then is that it actually had come out of the flooded waters that preceded the capture, so that it had a natural explanation. Alito, 1985, had gators, and then again in 1987, that big one. Lake Louisville has had a lot of gators over the years, but the two of note, 2006, and then was a big gator that was trailed for quite a while. And then in 2015, an 11-foot gator carcass was found on Lake Louisville. The interesting story there was that the game wardens, not being equipped to handle an 11-foot gator carcass, they chose to pull it back out into the lake and tethered it to a submerged tree stump that, and the gator sat on the surface, and I forget which news channel it was, put a helicopter up and had footage of a bloated alligator carcass floating on Lake Louisville. And because it was just fat and white, they thought that it was a human at first. So it created quite a stir. Lake Grapevines had a number of gators, a big one in 2006, and then an oddball here in little old Reno, Texas, which is to the northwest of the Nature Center here in Parker County, had a 3-foot gator show up. No one knows where it came from, but it was just an odd find out there. So if you look at the 120-year period from current day back to 1900, that timeline at the bottom there, you see the barcode look, but you see a few holes in it. And I will say that each red line does not necessarily illustrate just a single gator. It's a year that had references to gators. But I think some of these blank spots can be explained. This one here coincides with World War I, which if you read the newspapers of the day, then the news was about the war. It was not about things like finding gators, but also, if you will, the menfolk of the day were off fighting the war. They weren't out wandering around the hinterlands of the Metroplex and stumbling across gators. The 1920s blank here, there were all kinds of things that dominated the news. The late 20s economic crisis, prohibition, organized crime, all these things were the dominant pieces of the news. And again, people were just busy doing other things and not necessarily finding gators. And this final big blank spot, which is a 20-year span from about 67 to 87, covers the Endangered Species Act and its predecessors, when it was illegal to have any dealings with alligators. And so to kill one or to catch one or whatever would bring a felony down on you. So I don't think people were reporting those things. So if you look at the spots outside those black bars, then we pretty much have a gator every year or two, at least, making the news. But let's go to the 19th century. 1893, the Crowdis Brothers Hide Company, which was based in downtown Fort Worth. It was a family-owned business. It was a long-standing business dating way back. In this article that references was actually from 1940. And being a family-owned business, the people knew the history of their business. There were 2 alligator hides hanging on the walls of the warehouse. One of them had been there so long that when the walls had been whitewashed, they just whitewashed right over top of the gator hide. The owners of the place, family members, had been around forever, said that, well, the last time they could recall the whitewashing occur, this is in 1940, would be 47 years ago. So that takes it back to at least 1893. And why would the Fort Worth Hide Company have alligator hides hanging if they weren't dealing with alligator hides at that time? 1892, a report just says 2 young gators captured. 1891, we had a 10-foot gator killed on Bodark Island, which again is that Palmetto Slough alligator refuge area. 1891 again, large gator seen in the Trinity, 3 miles above Dallas. 1888, an 18-inch gator caught in the Trinity in Dallas. 1887, 10-foot gator hide found in the river bottom. Didn't say exactly where, but that was a Dallas reference, Dallas Morning News article. 1885, this is the first time the police got involved with alligators. They shot an 8-foot gator. I believe they shot it, but did not kill it. 1885, a 7-foot, 8-inch alligator was killed on Dozier Creek. From everything I can find, Dozier Creek references a creek that still exists, unnamed as far as maps I can find, but crosses Boat Club Road out by the Nature Center here. 1881, a 9-foot gator was killed in a pond near Arlington. 1878 was a big year. W. Barnhart kills an 8-foot, 4-inch gator on Cedar Springs Lake. The lake does not exist, at least by that name. I think it may have been a victim of development where it got filled in, but there is a Cedar Branch Creek in Dallas that, looking at soils and other things, it looks like it could possibly have been a body of water there at some point in time. But an 8-foot, 4-inch gator was killed, and the gentleman reported seeing 2 others, one of which was 12 feet long. Also in 1878, down in the Trinity River bottoms, and this is just a weird title. You'd never see this in a modern newspaper. This is the full title of the article. A mysterious woman who meets him near the gasworks about noon each day. Who is he and where did he come from? The article is about a hermit that lived in the bottoms. And the reporter never found the hermit. He talked to the woman, but never found the hermit, but he did find his home. His home was in a hollow tree, Keebler elf-like. But inside the home, the reporter found 2 items of note. One was a Bible, and that was the only piece of modern substance that the hermit had brought with him in there, or had acquired. The other thing was a large alligator hide. So if the only thing he brought with him was a Bible, then he must have acquired the hide locally. Where else would you get that but if there were alligators in the bottoms where he lived, maybe in defense of his own home. Also in 1878, 2 youth captured and killed what was quoted as another large specimen of these ponderous reptiles. And finally, we're getting to the beginnings here where there be dragons. In 1874, Columbus Fitzgerald, who is described as a townsman known for doing unexpected things, he captured an 8-foot alligator where they described as below the bluff in Fort Worth. And all the references I can find of the bluff in Fort Worth refers to the bluff just north of the courthouse, with today's courthouse. Also in 1874, a gentleman by the name of Lon Sellers recalls witnessing a 12-foot alligator killed on the bank just north of the courthouse. Now, that article was actually written in the 40s with Mr. Sellers recalling that, which always would bring into question his memory, except that he knew that his family moved to Fort Worth in 1874, and that was one of the first things he remembers from that. So I'll give him credit for that it's not just a retelling of Columbus Fitzgerald's story. Plus, killing and capturing are 2 different things, as in 8-foot and 12-foot. And finally, in 1850, 1 year after Major Ripley Arnold founded Fort Worth, one of his scouts killed a 14-foot alligator in the Trinity River, close enough that he could run back to camp and get 2 oxen to haul the carcass back to camp so that the soldiers could feast on alligator tail. All of the things that I've looked at, all the things I've talked about, anything that gave me enough of a location that I could map it, I mapped it on Google Earth. And here you see the results of that. And this is a modern aerial photo, obviously, But if you look at all that, boy, doesn't that lay out the waterways of the Metroplex very, very well? Does that not make substantial evidence that gators frequent our waters and have done so at least since 1850? And I'm going to venture to guess that that 1850 14-footer was not the former pet of a Native American tribe. So let's look at our goals and objectives here at the beginning. Can we agree that alligators currently inhabit North Texas water? I believe so. Can we agree that some pet alligators have been released in the area? I believe so. Can we agree that authorities have released some alligators in the area? I know so. I've done it. Can we agree that alligators predate European settlement of the area? I believe so. I'd welcome any kind of questions y'all might have. I'd like to share more information if I can. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Rob. That was very enlightening, and that you went to a lot of effort to research all of those different sightings and information on alligators. We have a question from Crystal, who wanted to know why the semi-tire pieces are called gators?
Semi-tire pieces?
You know, when a semi-truck tire breaks off and it's on the road?
Well, I mean, I can see the physical resemblance that makes sense to me, but I've never heard them called that. Just the kind of alligator pair thing.
It was in reference to when that one came missing out of the trunk and was flattened. And I'm told that those are called gators when you see them in the road.
Well, I don't know. If I lock on to that as the origins of that terminology, I'll let you know, because that would actually be very cool. Yeah, although I can't help but feel bad for that Dallas commander of VFW. He was trying to be nice.
Rob, this is Sharon. I presume that if these 8 and 10 and 12 footers are being found, that the inference would be that there are likely quite a few more little guys that are not being found.
Actually, okay, it'd be a different talk, but I'm willing to do that one too.
Oh,
because I'm going to tell you that, okay, 2010 and 11, we did our research out here, and we came up with the Nature Center population, and it's what's called a mark recapture study, et cetera, et cetera. And you do all the math, which is fancy, convoluted stuff. And they come up with a population of about 4 dozen, saying that's what we had. Now, excuse me, that made sense. I mean, we didn't see 4 dozen. You weren't going to go out any particular night and spotlight them and find them all, but I could see that being legit. But in 2012, when Uncle Sam, which by the way, his name was because he was caught right before the 4th of July, and we felt he wanted us, that when he was killed, over the next few, we saw a huge change in the numbers of our gators. And we saw our population flip from dominated by a handful of large ones to lots and lots of small ones. Gators are cannibalistic. Large gators keep the population low. And actually, if you look really close at some of the stuff I've given you tonight, in the 1800s, it was all a bunch of big gators. But they were almost all killed, at least either in the report or probably shortly thereafter. But in the 1900s, when all of a sudden small gators are the norm to be reported. And that makes sense. If they remove the big gators, then they let the population explode and survive.
Yeah, interesting. We have another question here. The zoo you referenced that let the alligator loose in the Trinity River, was that Forest Park, the early Fort Worth Zoo, or Forest Hill Zoo?
That was Forest Park Zoo.
Okay.
I've actually talked to Mike Foraker, director of the Fort Worth Zoo, to see if he knows that, knew about that one, and he didn't. It's one of those things that from the zoo world, you try to avoid some of that stuff.
Rob, it's Marty here. Great presentation.
Thank you, Marty. How are you?
I'm good. You too, obviously. Thanks for taking put that together for us. Really appreciate it.
There's a question here, Mr. Laro, who was he associated with?
He was just a citizen. I'm trying to remember. He was, I looked into him enough that he was a maintenance man for some business at that time. He was a Navy veteran. He's actually buried at Arlington Cemetery with honors from his naval service. Just, it was just such a weird rabbit hole. And actually I went down that hole last night. So this is stuff I'm adding to daily.
I might know his daughter is why I'm asking. Thank you.
I believe his only daughter was named Betty, and she passed away prior to his passing. So, but it may be a granddaughter.
Thank you very much. I wasn't aware. Yes, this is Sandy Laro and her. It's fascinating, the parallels. Thank you.
And then
I probably would have an uncle named Howard, if that is of any help.
And then the fishermen that were fined for killing Uncle Sam, I took notes, and it was about $5,300 for restitution and $1,000 miscellaneous fines. Does that sound about right, like what you said?
That's correct. That's the best of my knowledge. The state actually has restitution tables depending on the species, the size, the rarity, its game value, all those kind of things. An 11-foot gator is a pretty high dollar item.
Yeah.
Perspective, I think a bald eagle poached was about 10,000 now.
Wow. We've got two. Go ahead.
This is Megan. I have a question about the fishermen who poached that gator. They were in a small boat. Is that true?
Correct.
How did they get caught, and what was their end game when that thing was so large? What were they planning on doing? Did anybody know? This
is purely supposition on my part. So, because I didn't get a chance to interview the culprits, and I called them a fisherman to start the story. Now I'm going to call them poachers, because that's what they are. They, after shooting Sam, and what I think happened is that they saw a big gator. They'd watched a bunch of swamp people on TV. They had been there before, knew there were gators in the area. That's why they were carrying AR-15s, which, if you're not familiar with that particular firearm, the average person that's not particular with or familiar with firearms would call it an assault rifle. And they brought that along supposedly to shoot snakes, also illegal. But they see the gator, they shoot him. And they didn't watch swamp people carefully, because if you watch swamp people, where they shoot gators all the time, but they don't shoot them until they have a hook in them or a rope around them. Because when you shoot an alligator, they sink almost immediately. So they shoot an alligator, which they probably had seen the radio transmitter on his back. So they knew we could find him. And so they probably also watched CSI and figured that we could find that bullet and figure out who did it. So their story was they ran up the road or up the bank and over to 10 Mile Bridge Road, and they flagged down passerby. Marty, you know the passerby, it was Marty Richter. and claimed that they were attacked and they had shot this gator. And Marty Richter, who has since passed away, but was the owner and manager of the Cass Edwards Ranch adjacent to the Nature Center and a longtime friend and supporter of the Nature Center, he was the one that called the game wardens in and started the suspicions on their story immediately. And because they had, although they were attacked by the alligator, they were able to get out of their boat without getting wet and climb up a 6-foot vertical bank to get above and shoot down on it. So they obviously were out of harm's way when they actually shot it. And then I think they were looking to have a trophy alligator, and they'd watched enough TV to realize that things went wrong and that they had to come up with a story. I've heard their 911 call. Yeah, none of it goes together. So they were not fishermen. They were out to poach in the first place.
Yeah. Still got a few more questions, and I'll ask these last 2 or 3 if that's all right with everybody. How about, some people have said they've seen him on some of the bike trails in Fort Worth. What's the likelihood of encountering a gator on one of in urban Fort Worth on a bike trail or nature trail?
I'm going to back up to this map. I think that answers the question, really.
Yeah.
Yes, these are over the past 170 years, but the Trinity has alligators.
Mm-hmm.
All there is to it. And so finding them is, I look upon as a lucky experience, mm-hmm. rather than something to fear. Now, I will admit, okay, when I first came here in 1997, I was surprised to be told there were alligators on the property. It took me 3 years to find my first one, which was a little 3-footer way up by Eagle Mountain Dam, and technically not even on Nature Center property, but that made me excited. To be honest with you, the other job I was considering when I came to Fort Worth was I was offered a position in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and the main interest I had in that position was that area had a lot of alligators, and I was always excited by being around gators. So coming here and finding they had them, I was thrilled. Seeing it, I was even doubly thrilled. But then as I learned about them and started putting it all together, and I think we're seeing, several things go into play here. In fact, I'm going to back up a little bit more to this, that an area right here that shows the Endangered Species Act time, where there was very little gator activity reported. That was a time where I think the average person really became acquainted with the idea of gators. And at that time, back on this stretch of river through the Nature Center, the people that fished out here, they probably carried a pistol or a rifle with them, so that when they did see snakes, but the old time fishermen knew about the gators too. And I think they shot a bunch of them. And I think the gators adapted to being impacted by human presence. And there's research in Florida, which obviously has more gators and a longer history, known history with gators, but that gators that live in urban areas change their behavior. The big males do not bellow anymore in their courtship in urban areas, because making a big spectacle of yourself is a good way to get shot. And I think the same thing occurred here, that our gators went into hiding. Also, but as the Endangered Species Act, the positives of that took place, of gators repopulating, they also lost some of those hiding behaviors, but our culture changed. That people, it isn't a see gator, kill gator mentality anymore that it used to be. In 2005, which was the first big gator that I dealt with around here, everybody that heard about it wanted that gator killed.
Wow.
And 2016 with Rooster, there were still people that wanted it killed. But most importantly, when Rooster was killed and the news was first broke on Facebook, most of the responses, most of the comments were, why did it die? It didn't need to die. We've seen a change in the culture that allows us to coexist with animals like alligators. And if you're going down the Trinity Trail and you see one, maintain your distance. If you have a dog, it's a perfect reason why you should keep your dog on a leash. Gators do not like dogs. And
No.
the one consolation I've made, or what's the word I want? Concession, yes, that I've made to knowing that we have big gators on the refuge here is that before I learned that, I used to bring my dogs out on my days off and let them go swimming. I don't do that anymore. At the same time, the mothers of those two beautiful little kids you saw earlier, they can tell you stories about me taking them out and seining in the river, helping me get aquatic invertebrates for programs and such, knowing that we had gators in the area. You have to be intelligent, cognizant, aware of the situation, and gators are no threat. The biggest fear I have is of people feeding alligators at the nature center or anywhere in the Metroplex, because that is how you get a gator habituated to associate food with people, and that's how attacks will occur. So as long as people are smart, I don't worry about it a bit.
Rick, excuse me, you're not Rick, you're Rob. Rob, thank you so much. We have a few more questions, but I'm a firm believer in not carrying over too long. So could you give us your email address for someone who would like to email you another question or two? Sure.
It's kind of long because it's a city address, but it's Robert.Denkhaus. And for anybody that doesn't know me, let me go, so you can see the spelling there, Robert.Denkhaus at Fort Worth, Texas, all one word, no spaces, no abbreviations, .gov.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Sorry you can't hear all our applause. Thank you.
Thank you.